All right, thank you guys. We'll go and get started now. Again, so what happened is recently the transition from a recommended practice to standard happened in 2023. What does that mean? The language around the NFPA 70B is very similar to the NFPA 70E. 70E is the electrical safety in the workplace. It means that OSHA can write citations for you for not complying for that standard. And that's really the biggest driver behind everyone wanting to get on board and do this now is that the fact that OSHA can hold you liable for not having a preventive maintenance program for your electrical equipment. There's a bit of a scurrying going on because there's not a lot of documentation out there open and available for the electrical maintenance program, also known as the EMP. And we are currently helping co-develop those programs for a lot of our customers. It has to be customized to your industry, your equipment. So you can't just go buy a program off the shelf, a document off the shelf that's going to fit for your particular environment. You're going to have it kind of developed with your team and our team or whoever you choose to help develop this program and establish preventive maintenance schedules, the intervals, what needs to be done, the type of inspections, and all these things are part of your program. So again, you can't just buy it off the shelf. It's going to have to be developed, and it's going to take a little bit of work on your part, and our part too. So the transition, 2023, it was become mandatory. The way this works, and so you kind of have an idea what to expect and changes, is every 3 years, the National Electrical Code is updated. And as the code is updated, the following year, the NFPA 70B and E and all the other subparts of it are updated on 3-year intervals as well. So when the National Electrical Code is updated, you can expect the following year, there's going to be an update for the other programs as well. So you got to keep your ear to the ground. As an EHS or maintenance person or any of those other roles, you have to keep your ear to the ground on any changes upcoming and make sure that your company is tracking on any of those changes. So, and of course, it's also just a phone call or a text message to someone like me that can help, basically read the standard for you and then give you the short summary of how it applies to you and your facility. We're happy to do that. There are 5 key points around the standard that you need to be aware of. I will emphasize the ones that I think that you really need to, that I've seen from our standpoint that are probably the hottest items that they're looking for right now. Documentation. That's probably the number 1. Infrared. Number 2, and then of course the electrical maintenance program. That's the 3 big drivers behind all this: documentation, intervals, and then of course infrared scanning and inspection, switchgear testing, and our other motor control centers and other type of breaker testing. I'm going to talk briefly about that too. Classic example of what housekeeping looks like here on a disconnect switch. These are all pictures taken from different times I've gone in to do different inspections. Of course, I'm not going to tell which clients they are in case you're attending. Just keep your mouth quiet. Don't tell on yourself right now. But this is one particular instance of a lumber factory, sawdust, which is flammable, obviously, dust accumulating inside the disconnect switches. And this happened over a brief amount of time. In less than 5 years, this is the accumulation that happened inside this environment. So we'll go over some different key points around here. The things that you need to also be aware of on the equipment side. Your equipment has to fit within 3 categories. We're going to look at some intervals and what that means. And those 3 categories are critical, important, and non-critical. And it's hard sometimes to look at these definitions and decide what my equipment falls into. And you might have one or more of the other. And also, a piece of equipment may fall into more than one category. And if that happens, you have to pick the highest. You have to pick the highest of importance, of criticalness. So when you're looking at a piece of equipment, you have to put it into a schedule of how often you're going to check and inspect it, and then what level of what critical is, and if it is critical or non-critical. The intervals on condition 1s, 2, and 3, I want y'all to kind of look at this slide and see what it's evaluating. You'll notice one key factor: nothing ever exceeds 60 months. 5 years is the maximum you can go without any interval for a maintenance inspection. So if you're keeping notes or tracking on that, make sure you keep that note. This includes your motor control centers, circuit breakers, switchboards, panel boards, bus ducts, all those other big pieces of equipment, busways. They should be inspected at minimum every 5 years. There's been a practice within, I guess, the industry over the past 30, 40 years that I've been doing this. There's been a practice of just every 10 years doing your switchgear testing, panel board testing, and that's all fine. But the standards have changed and updated. Now it is every 5 years or 60 months. That's the longest interval you're going to find. It's going to be a little more cost effect. I mean, there's going to be a cost factor that goes into this, but this is something we have to budget in and put in place. These new standards are pretty stringent on the intervals. They're a lot tighter than what we've been used to. Terminology. I want to kind of briefly go over terminology with you real quick. Busways and bus ducts are the same thing. Medium voltage. There are some things here on this slide that's touching on medium voltage. Medium voltage is defined several different ways, but the most common way is anything between 1,000 and 32,000 volts. That's what we call a medium voltage classification. Is anything between 1,000 and 32,000 or 33,000 actually volts is considered medium voltage. If you have those kinds of systems, you should be paying attention to the medium voltage, and especially the what we call the substations. When we get into the substation slide, I'll talk about that briefly. Molded case breakers, MCBs, there's a lot of abbreviations used within this world. Just know that molded case breakers, air breakers, vacuum circuit breakers, all those things fall into a certain category that are listed inside these schedules within the standard that you need to be addressing. Low voltage is anything below 1,000 volts. And that's usually where most of us deal with in an inspection. However, a lot of us, I know some of my clients, I can see y'all in they're attending. Some of you definitely fit in the medium voltage units. Okay, so moving on, panel board, switchboard, switch gears. I do think it's worthy of noting what's the difference between a switch gear and a switchboard. If you're looking at those two things, switch gear is actually just a term for a big transformer. That's really all it is. So if you're changing the voltage coming in and out, so you have a primary and a secondary side, then that would be a transformer. That's a switch gear. A switchboard is basically just a distribution point. It's taking the same voltage and distributing it to other subordinate breakers. It's just a real big panel board, to be honest. So just to kind of putting that out there, UPS systems, that's at the very bottom, or also known as uninterruptible power supplies. Those guys are also part of the standard and requirements. We have to look at those too now. Okay, moving on. The procedures that we have to have that are established are routine inspections, testing, and maintenance activities. So it's a very basic or broad explanation for what has to happen. Again, it's up to you to read the standard or have someone help you develop a program around that standard that meets your specific requirements. Every one of these factories that you're working at are a little different somehow, and they all have to be tailored or customized for the different parts of this. So the intervals, the intervals again are in that schedule. We can help you determine what those intervals look like for equipment. But if you read through the standard, you kind of place your equipment at some of that. Some of it's considered what we call severe duty. Severe duty are things like caustic environments, outside, outdoors, inside of areas that are wet locations. There are lots of ways you can classify something as severe duty. And severe duty means you're going to be conditioned, the third condition, which means that you're going to have more thorough inspections and more often. You're going to be looking at every 6 months on your infrared scans. You're going to be looking at housekeeping inspections every monthly or some things like that. So the intervals change significantly when you have those types of classification. But a lot of us fit into the normal duty or standard duty is, again, every year do an infrared scan. And then, of course, housekeeping inspection every 5 years, things like that. Other things that you should, I should mention this third bullet point here. Mandatory intervals of study shall not exceed 5 years. Again, back on that whole thing, 60 months is the maximum interval for which you can go without any piece of equipment not being addressed in your program. Short circuit studies, coordination studies, and incident energy analyses are all three things that we offer as part of our arc flash studies. Our arc flash studies they kind of run parallel to the NFPA 7D program. So anytime you need mitigation, or mitigation is a nice fancy way of saying lowering the hazards. Anytime you need those things done, that's part of a coordination study. Short circuit studies we do in coordination with your utility company to try and find a way to reduce your short circuit analysis of your main transformers coming into your facility. And then, of course, incident energy analyses is when we do you get the calories per square centimeter that you're exposing your employees to when they're opening and working on live equipment. Now, what type of inspections are we really looking at? Visual is probably the number one. And then visual, again, you don't want to put your people into a condition where they're pencil whipping the PMs because they're monthly inspections. These are things we really need to open and look at on the correct interval. So we want to emphasize visual inspection. This is probably the number one. I'll show you some slides here in a few minutes. This is the number one reason why we do these inspections of what we find inside the electrical equipment sometimes. Cleaning, we're going to explain to you some rules about that, what cleaning looks like. Lubrication only applies to moving components such as disconnect stabs. There are open air breakers and some other breakers and feeders and motor control centers that have moving components inside that need to be inspected within a 5-year interval at maximum. Then mechanical, and then the last part of it is electrical tests of protected devices like circuit breakers, and we'll touch on that one a little bit too. Infrared scans are probably the number one way to find issues, and this is a big part of my business unit that we do. We find a lot of problems. I don't think there's been a place I visited yet that I did an infrared scan and didn't find at least 3 or 4 problems while I was there. We're going to find problems and help you mitigate those and get those fixed and corrected. If not, we have business partners to help get those these pieces of equipment to help get those repaired for you and get them back in service. Looking at these two particular scans, these you can already identify what's happening in some of these features. You can see that the middle load the high heat signature comes from resistance and it comes from poor connection. It could be an overload condition, but each one of these looks like each one of these conditions is just that. It's corroded and there's a bad connection at that location. And as that heat increases, the heat signature increases, the corrosion increases. It's a catastrophic event just building. It doesn't improve over time. It just gets worse as the heat builds up, more corrosion, more resistance, and then more heat. If you're looking at these 4 slides for the problems, I think most of you guys that have may be exposed to this kind of stuff on a regular basis can kind of identify what's going on. But these are things that we're looking for, and these are things that I would put in my report for you. The one on the far left is a termination issue. Right there, that hot spot, that is a definite sign of a poor termination. It could be a loose lug. It could be a wire that's not they basically secured the lug on top of the insulation and didn't make a good connection onto the lug. There's multiple reasons for that high heat signature, but 183 degrees is definitely a key point where I would say this is a severe problem. You need to, at the next available weekend or whatever, you need to shut this piece of equipment off and redo that connection. The 2 middle frames are showing you some more heat signatures from overload conditions. The one at the bottom is a imbalance. It's showing an imbalance where one leg is pulling a much higher current than the rest, and it could also be a termination issue given the fact that the heat's located right near the termination block. The upper one is showing that what we call the stabs, or also known as knives. The knives or stabs is where those the 3 actually stabs are engaging in the top of the disconnect switch. They're building a high heat signature. This is something we can identify easily with the infrared scan. And the one on the right is a fuse mismatch. Fuse mismatches are a big problem. When we open up these panels, they usually show an imbalance and generate heat signatures that show a problem. That's exactly what happened here. They used 2 different classifications of fuses. They were not matched at all. The recommendation there is, of course, to replace all 3 fuses, then rescan. So this is a great way to troubleshoot and find problems within your organization without causing any disruption to your schedules. We can, basically we do these while they're up online running during normal work hours. Circuit breaker testing is, however, this is done offline. This is done when the equipment's powered off, usually during shutdowns. So July 4th or Christmas holidays, when y'all have a scheduled shutdown or long period shutdown, you'll call in one of our partners, such as Power Solutions or Instel, and one of those guys will come in and do your circuit breaker testing for you. But we can help facilitate that. We have business partners that help do this kind of testing, and we are happy to make those connections for you guys and get those type of things. Then, and what kind of breakers are we talking about? We're talking about breakers greater than 800 amps. 800 amps and larger need this kind of testing, and at minimum on the standard classification, it says 60 months. All right. So housekeeping inspections. These are things I found in recent housekeeping inspections. One of the ones I didn't put up here is the rodents. I don't know how many of y'all have wildlife living in your electrical equipment, but I have found nests and of all sorts and sizes. I found more than often. I found lizards and other reptiles living inside electrical equipment. So in this case, you can see where the screw in the left was run through the panel board and hit the wire. This is a big problem with panel boards that have the covers where they have this style bolt coming in. We don't like to see self-drilling and self-tapping screws for this reason. They're notorious for cutting into wires on the back side of the panel. So if you're replacing your hardware on these panels, use a shallow bolt if possible. Do not use self-drilling, self-tapping hardware, as they will cut into wires, and shield the wiring on the back side. Another case in point was where they had so much wire stuffed into the enclosure that they pinched the wires when they put the cover on and cut into the insulation. That's what you see on that picture on the right. So these are all things we identified when we do a housekeeping inspection, along with the rodents and the sawdust and all the other things that we come across. We tend to try and fix those things for you if possible while we got them open. But if it's something that requires you to shut the piece of equipment off, then we would just put it in our report and give it to you and let you schedule a proper downtime to take it apart and clean the equipment offline. So things I want you to note from this presentation: infrared. This should be done while the equipment is energized, loaded, and on normal demand schedule. It's not going to do you any good to do an infrared scan on something that's turned off. It's just, you're going to get no heat signature. So it needs to be on a normal work day. In contrast to that, the feeder and circuit breaker testing is performed offline. That's usually done during your scheduled shutdowns. And then you got to usually bring in somebody. It's going to involve usually a day or two of multiple people. It should be a coordinated event. Housekeeping is done while the equipment is turned off. Do not do housekeeping on any equipment while it's open and running, if possible. And then the last part of this is qualified electrical workers are the only people allowed to open and inspect electrical equipment. It don't matter if it's online, open, energized, whatever. The qualified electrical worker is the only person who should be in there. He's familiar with it, or she is familiar with it, and should be the only person doing the maintenance on the equipment. So what do we do? Well, in life and safety, biggest key element to this particular NFPA standard is to do the infrared scanning. The infrared scanning is a great tool, and it's probably the one that's probably the highest demand tool that we get for finding the problems within your electrical equipment. When you ask us to come in, we're going to give you a very detailed report that's going to show you, pictures of exactly what we found, how to correct it, recommendations, and basically it's going to give you everything you need to do to either take to a contractor or do yourself with the in-house. All right. Now, the electrical maintenance program is the other part of this. Documentation. You got to document everything you do. Make sure that you had developed a standard or program that's within your own organization that has your company's letterheads, or whatever you want to call it, headers. But the document needs to include, at minimum, the schedule for the equipment. You have to identify the equipment within your schedule. So you got to actually identify your, switchgear room 1, switchgear room 2, switchgear room 3, things like that. You need to identify the interval of which you're going to inspect it and the type of inspection you're going to do it. So you're going to say, okay, electrical vault 1. We're going to inspect it every year, and we're going to do an infrared scan. Then every 2 years, we're going to do a housekeeping routine inspection on it. So we're going to open it and clean it and vacuum out or whatever inside of every 2 or 5 years. Just an example. That's what your program should look like. It should define all those things and what you're going to do. And of course, documentation. You keep that record keeping up the actual inspections, so that if you have a visit from compliance from OSHA, that you can actually demonstrate that you have a program and you're following and adhering to it. The things that you need to be aware of that we can help you with are like the very bottom. If you look at the bottom of the slide, I'll go through this real quick with you. Probably the most common items we get is level 1 and 2 scanning, thermography scanning. I can teach your folks how to do that in-house. So say, for instance, you have FLIR camera. FLIR is we use a Fluke. I use a Fluke VT04 thermographer scanner, but I'm very familiar with FLIR's equipment. So whatever piece of equipment you're using to scan, we can help you learn how to use that properly and implement that into your program as far as the standards that this piece of equipment has to meet in order to be used for thermography scanning. Because there are devices such as little infrared scanners, filters that you can snap over your smartphone and take pictures with your phone that are, for all intents and purposes, infrared scanning, infrared equipment. But the problem is it's not calibrated and it's not tested to a standard. So that being said, they're great tools and they're fun to use, but they're not going to meet the requirements from the NFPA 70B standard. So make sure we use equipment they're scanning, whether it be Fluke, FLIR, or whoever, that meets those standards, that has in there specifically that it meets the ASTM standards that were specified inside the NFPA 70B standard. All right. The other thing is the NFPA 70E, electrical safety in the workplace. We can help train your folks around that, how to work around live circuits. Inspections are non-contact, non-destructive means of looking at it. So we're going to address it a little bit differently from arc flash, because arc flashes usually means you're interacting with electrical circuits. The idea here is that you're not going to actually interact with it. You're just going to open, inspect it, and close it right back up. The windows, if you have the windows on your equipment, that's a great way to kind of go and basically we want to make sure everyone changes or alters the equipment, if possible, to put the inspection windows in place to keep us from opening up panels all the time. So it's important that when you're doing the inspections, if you got one or two panels that are really difficult, extremely heavy doors to open and lift off, you might want to think about putting one of these inspection windows in to help take away the risk of opening this panel board every year or every 6 months or however often you're having to do it. So putting in these particular types of equipment will help keep you from having to basically put people at risk by exposing them to energized circuits. And then the last part of that is train the trainer classes. We can also provide training for your associates to where they're training the people within your organization after we leave to do their own inspections, housekeeping, infrared, whatever. We can help facilitate all those types of training. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up and thank y'all for your attention. And if you have any questions or if there are questions, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan now, let him ask those, and hopefully I can address those for you.
All right. If you go ahead and leave your, oh, never mind. I was going to say leave your PowerPoint on the screen, but I will take over.
You got it there, Nathan, or you want me to take over?
I got it. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. That was fantastic. I do have a couple follow-up questions. Again, if anyone has their own, please put those into the chat window. I think you already answered one of them, how to do the IR scanning. That I think you cleared that. Would it be possible to get a copy of this PowerPoint to send out to everybody? Is that something we can do? Absolutely.
I'll send it to you right away.
Perfect. And we'll send out an email on Monday or Tuesday to everybody with that attached. What about, are there any, I know you said it's going to be specific for each one of the client's locations, electrical equipment, but is there some type of sample or template? You talked through it, like this is the equipment, this is our plan, this is how often we're going to do it. Is there somewhere that these people can go to find that?
Yeah, there was a trick to that, though. It's copyrighted, so I can't share it like that. So get this. If NFPA 70B is actually, I can't copy and paste anything from the standard. Even though I can buy the standard, I can't copy paste from it. So it's copyrighted. So the only answer to that is that they have to buy the standard, and then they can do it. And then they can take that copy paste and basically start plugging in the different pieces. So once you buy that standard, I think it's like $100. Then yes, you can. Now you have the template within that document to start building your own program.
Gotcha. Well, that actually segues into one of my other questions. Can you provide, and again, we can do this with a PowerPoint, but can you provide links to some of the authorized IR devices?
Yes. I'll put a couple in there.
That would be fantastic. All right, sample template, where to get started with IR. All right, that answers the questions that I had noted. Unless there are any more from the audience, we're going to go ahead and close this out. Again, thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on this webinar. It has been recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel by Tuesday. Our next webinar, as you can see on this screen, comes up on July 26th. That's going to be OSHA's Respirable Crystalline Silica National Emphasis Program. Whew, try saying that a few times fast. Anthony Wilkes will be presenting on that. The respirable crystalline silica standard has been around for a number of years now, but there is a national emphasis program on it, so be mindful of that. Join us next month on that. The next few topics, we don't have specific dates for August and September, but microplastics, energy audits, those are coming up. We do have a special event. This is a live instructor-led class followed by a free portion in the afternoon. So on September 12th, we're going to do the ArcFlash NFPA 70E training. Again, that is open to the public. We'll send out some links. You can pay for that portion of the class. And then in the afternoon, we're going to have a EV battery symposium where a number of key players are going to be coming in, talking about EV batteries, how to deal with them, how to properly store them, if they catch fire, how to deal with that. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And again, that portion in the afternoon will be free, open to the public. So keep your eyes out for that email. Just kind of letting you know that it's coming up. Thank you, everybody, and stay safe out there.